Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tochi. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. Ada sat by the window of their third-floor apartment in Enugu's Independence layout, her eyes tracing the fading lines of daylight across the rooftops. The city was slowly dipping into its evening rhythm. Cars honking in distant congestion, smoke curling from pepper soup joints, and hawkers yelling about gala and mineral with voices like tired drums. From the outside, her life looked glossy, married to an upwardly mobile man well-dressed, and living in a two-bedroom apartment painted in cream and ambition. But behind the painted walls and polished floors, there was a quiet ache that never left the room, the kind that lurked beneath conversations and bloomed in silence. Her husband, John, usually returned home late, worn out and emotionally unavailable, like a phone forever on low battery. For 5 years, Ada had danced around the same void, smiling when people asked, "How far now? Any good news?" She had become an expert in the art of dodging questions, throwing up half-laughs and switching topics like a magician distracting a crowd. Each passing month deepened the crack in her spirit, but her silence remained intact. It wasn't a silence born of weakness, no. It was a silence carved from love, chiseled by promises, and kept alive by fear, his fear. John, on the other hand, moved through life like a man whose shadow had run ahead of him. He worked as a procurement officer at an oil servicing firm in Abakba. Well paid, well respected, but hollowed out. At 37, he had built a life of comfort and credibility. Well-ironed shirts, a black Toyota Corolla, and a baritone voice that could silence a room. Yet, behind his smiles was a man nursing a secret so heavy it had curved his shoulders. He had known the truth since their second year of marriage, after Ada insisted they both run tests in a private clinic in New Haven. The result had nearly caved him in. Low motility. No viable sperm count. The doctor had spoken in careful tones, but each word was a hammer hitting his pride. He cried that night, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, shivering sobs of a man seeing his masculinity evaporate like morning dew. Ada held him. She didn't flinch. She didn't threaten to leave. Instead, she became even gentler, like a balm rubbing into bruised ego. He made her promise not to tell anyone. Said he needed time. Said the world wouldn't understand. And Ada, loyal as dusk, agreed. From that moment, he watched as his shame wrapped itself around her neck, and she wore it daily like a borrowed necklace that didn't match her outfit. The problem wasn't that the world assumed she was barren. The problem was that she allowed them believe it, just to shield the man who had zipped his lips and tossed the key of the truth far into the river of cowardice. John's mother, a woman who dressed like every outing was a wedding, didn't hold back her venom. A woman that cannot give a man a child is like a dry well, looks strong but offers nothing. She never said it to Ada's face directly, but her words often floated loud enough in the house during visits, coated in sarcasm and sweet tea. His younger sister, Uchechi, always gave Ada the kind of glances reserved for stray dogs on clean porches. Every family gathering became a theater of carefully staged insults, suggestions of herbalists to visit, testimonies of women who finally conceived after marrying a serious man, and sharp proverbs like knives. Ada, the quiet flame, never raised her voice. She simply smiled, helped with the dishes, served the food, and held her tears until they were alone, where they became invisible rivers soaking her pillow. There were nights John tried to touch her, and she turned away, not out of anger, but because the touch no longer carried love, only guilt wrapped in sweat. Time moved like a one-legged man across their marriage. Slow, painful, loud in silence. In Enugu, gossip traveled faster than emergency ambulances, and neighbors had already begun speculating about her womb, as though it was public property. Ada learned to walk past whispering mouths with her head high, even though inside her, pieces of herself chipped away daily. At work, colleagues were getting pregnant, naming their babies, posting photos with captions like "My answered prayer." She would like and comment with purple hearts while swallowing lumps the size of yam. Her boss, a nosy woman with thin patience and thick lipstick, once joked, "Ada, you day wait make we retire before you born?" She had laughed, too loudly, too quickly, and excused herself to the bathroom, where she clutched the sink and fought back the ache that throbbed behind her eyes. Even at church, she was invited to the Fruit of the Womb prayer group, where women wailed and rolled on the floor. But Ada kept her knees dry and her mouth shut, because she wasn't looking for what they were. She wasn't barren. She wasn't the problem. But she was tired, tired of carrying a burden that didn't have her name on it, tired of pretending that her silence was patience when really, it was slow poison. The clinic in New Haven had white walls that hummed with quiet judgments. Even the chairs seemed to know the weight of untold stories. When Ada first convinced John to take the tests, it was after a long, silent dinner where the only sound was the scraping of cutlery. She had finally whispered, "Let's stop guessing. Let's know for sure." He nodded reluctantly. The next week, they walked into the fertility center dressed like a couple ready for vacation, not disaster. The receptionist smiled too widely, asked them to fill out forms with sterile questions. How often do you have intercourse? Do you consume alcohol? History of STDs? John scribbled answers with a stiff wrist while Ada pretended to read a magazine. The waiting room was filled with other couples, some holding hands, some not speaking, some with eyes that looked like they had already buried a child who was never born. The tests came and went, blood drawn, samples collected in awkward rooms with sterile cups and pale blue gloves. Ada's results came back first, normal, healthy, no red flags. She wanted to celebrate, but her joy was muted by the knowledge that the second report was still brewing like a storm behind the clouds. When John's results were finally handed over, he read the paper 3 times, as though the words might change. They didn't. He folded it slowly, like it might cut him. On the ride home, he didn't speak. And when Ada reached for his hand, he pulled it back without looking. That night, he didn't eat. He went straight to the room, turned off the lights, and curled into himself like a child trying to disappear under the weight of his own bones. Ada stood at the door, watching him, unsure if she should walk in or let him drown quietly in whatever ocean had opened inside him. She finally slipped into bed beside him and whispered, "We'll find a way." But he said nothing, just lay there, breathing too heavily, like the air itself was refusing to go down. Days passed, then weeks. John avoided any topic that looked like it might grow roots and bring up the issue. He buried himself in work, returning later than usual, his shirts reeking of cigarettes, though he never admitted he smoked. They stopped praying together. He stopped attending family functions with Ada. The walls of their home didn't shake with arguments. They echoed with emptiness, the kind that swells between two people who are saying everything without speaking at all. One Saturday morning, as Ada was ironing clothes, John said, "Please don't tell anyone. Not even my mother." His voice cracked mid-sentence, and she turned slowly to look at him. He was leaning against the wall like a man trying not to fall. "Just give me time," he added. She nodded. It was the easiest lie she had ever agreed to. Because deep down, she wanted to protect him, even if it meant letting the world think she was the broken one. Over the following months, Ada built her days around appearances. She would smile when she needed to, attend baby showers, and buy clothes for other people's children without blinking. But inside, she felt like a cracked porcelain doll, elegant on the outside, hollow where it mattered. Her mother called often, asking questions that sounded sweet, but left salt in her mouth. "How is the waiting going? Have you tried that prophet in Asaba?" Ada would lie gently, saying they were believing God, that miracles take time. Each time she said those words, she felt like someone peeling her own skin with a blunt blade. Meanwhile, John's family grew louder. His mother, fond of announcing opinions like traffic reports, started telling distant relatives that Ada's womb was closed because she spent her youth on makeup and trousers instead of prayers. She told their pastor during one midweek service that, "My son's wife may need deliverance." And yet, John remained silent, wearing his shame like an invisible cloak. He let them hurl stones at Ada while hiding the fact that he was the one who had built the glass house. It was easier to let her be the target than to expose his own fragility. And Ada, too proud to cry publicly, bore the weight in silence. Sometimes she stood in front of the mirror and whispered to her reflection, "You are not the problem." But the reflection never answered back. The worst nights were the ones where hope showed up uninvited. A missed period. A dull ache in her lower back. The sudden urge to throw up after jollof rice. She would rush to buy test kits, praying with bated breath, bargaining with God like a desperate trader in Ogbeat Market. But each time, the strip remained stubbornly negative, an unwavering, merciless single line. The kind that didn't even blink before crushing you. After each disappointment, she would sit on the bathroom floor, wrap her arms around her knees, and sob silently until her body felt like it had been wrung out. John would sometimes find her like that, and instead of holding her, he would return to bed like the scene never happened. One night, she screamed into the sink, Why won't you say something? Why are you letting me drown for your sins? He stood at the doorway, eyes glossy but mouth sealed, as if speaking would cause the walls to crumble. In the morning they acted normal, brushed their teeth beside each other, talked about Nipa and fuel scarcity, pretended they were okay. They had become two ghosts living in the same body, clinging to a lie too fragile to hold but too dangerous to release. And with each passing month, Ada felt herself slipping further into a darkness that had John's name carved into the walls. Ada never planned to speak that day. It wasn't a speech rehearsed in front of the mirror, nor a moment she anticipated. It came like thunder without warning, loud, raw, and irreversible. The living room in John's family home had always felt like a stage where she was forced to perform a role that left bruises on her soul. The air was always tense, the couches always too stiff, and the eyes too sharp, watching her every move like hawks circling a wounded animal. That Saturday started like any other. They had invited her for what they called a discussion, but everyone in the room knew it was an ambush in disguise. John's mother sat at the center, draped in heavy ankara and powdered with entitlement. Beside her was Auntie Gloria, her sister, who only showed up when there was trouble or when someone had given birth, neither of which applied to Ada. John sat by the window, arms folded, a shadow of the man he once was. He hadn't looked Ada in the eye since they walked in. His silence was louder than the accusations flung her way. 5 years and nothing to show. My friend's daughter married 2 years ago, and her second child is crawling already, his mother began, the bitterness in her voice dripping like spoiled palm oil. Ada sat quietly, as she always did, letting the words slap her skin without reacting. But then someone said it. Auntie Gloria leaned forward, lowered her voice and said, "You don't want to say it out loud, but this one is probably cursed. These types of women are why some men secretly take second wives." It wasn't the insult that broke her. It was the way everyone looked away, like they agreed but didn't want to say it out loud. John didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't clear his throat or defend her. That was when the silence inside Ada exploded. She rose slowly, like someone waking from a bad dream, and turned to face the room that had called her a ghost for too long. Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't water. She spoke with the kind of calm that made everyone more afraid than if she had screamed. "Enough," she said, drawing the word out like a knife. "I will not sit here and carry a shame that doesn't belong to me." A strange stillness took over the room. Even the ticking wall clock seemed to hold its breath. John is the one who cannot have children. He knows. I know. And now, all of you will know too. John's mother dropped her spoon. Auntie Gloria froze. The air seemed to tremble, as though it too had been caught off guard. "I carried his secret for 5 years, Ada continued, her voice still flat, her eyes locked on John. "I watched you insult me, call me names, and treat me like an empty calabash. And I said nothing. But not today." For the first time in a long while, she saw fear in their eyes, not of her but of the truth. She didn't wait for a reply. She picked up her handbag, straightened her dress, and walked out of the house, her heels clicking against the tiles like gunshots in a war zone. The days that followed felt like walking through the ruins of a building she helped decorate, only to watch it collapse in slow motion. John didn't come home that night, or the next. When he finally returned, he said nothing. Just took off his shoes, dropped his keys, and went into the bedroom. The silence between them wasn't new, but now it was sharp, cutting through rooms, slicing through small talk. Ada no longer tried to fill it with softness. She cooked for herself, locked the bedroom door when she needed space, and stopped pretending she was okay. John's family didn't call for 3 days. Then the calls began, first from his cousin Kalechi, then his mother, who left voice notes that bounced between denial and disbelief. "Ada, you're confused. That kind of thing, is it not spiritual? Are you now a doctor?" They didn't apologize. They didn't ask for details. They just wanted the silence put back in its box. But Ada had burned the box and scattered the ashes. Even her own family heard whispers. Her sister called one morning to ask, "You said it in front of them? Are you not afraid?" Ada looked out the window and answered, "Afraid of what?" The truth. There was a power in speaking. A strange strength she had never felt before. For the first time in 5 years, she walked through the streets of Enugu with a straight back. People might talk. They always did. But now they would be talking about the truth, and that made all the difference. John's behavior shifted like weather after a storm, unpredictable, restless, and uncomfortable. He would start conversations and stop midway, pacing the corridor like a man chasing his own echo. One evening, he stood by the balcony and said, "You embarrassed me." Ada didn't even turn from the sink. "No," she replied, rinsing a plate slowly. "You embarrassed yourself. I just stopped covering it." That night, he slept on the couch. The next day, he left the house early, didn't return until well after midnight. Ada no longer asked where he went. She had stopped asking questions with answers she didn't trust. Yet, something in her heart remained open. Not for him, but for the version of him that once made her believe in forever. She thought about leaving more than once. Packed a small bag. Even checked apartment listings in GRA. But something tethered her, not weakness, but an unfinished chapter. She needed closure, or healing, or maybe just space to figure out who she was outside the weight of his secret. Then, one Monday morning, as she was leaving for work, he handed her a small card. A fertility clinic in Independence Layout. A new specialist. "He wants to see both of us," John said, eyes lowered. Ada held the card, said nothing, and walked out the door. On the ride to the office, she stared at the card. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely stuck. The wheels had turned. Whether it was too late, she didn't know. But the lie was dead. And maybe, just maybe, something else could be born in its place. The morning came with a strange quiet, the kind that hovered above the furniture and pressed softly against the curtains as sunlight bled slowly into the corners of the bedroom. Ada stirred first, her hand resting on her slightly swollen belly. She sat up gently, blinking at the filtered daylight, unsure whether what had pulled her from sleep was a dream or something deeper. Then a slow twinge in her lower back returned, not sharp but persistent, the kind of whisper the body gives when it's beginning to say something important. She placed her feet on the tiled floor, gripping the edge of the bed, her breath shallow. The contractions weren't harsh yet, just waves of discomfort that forced her to pause every few steps. She paced, hands behind her back, pressing gently into her spine as she walked. John was still asleep, or maybe pretending. He'd grown good at quietness lately, learning to disappear without leaving the room. Ada didn't wake him. Instead, she took one slow walk to the window, parting the curtains and looking out into the stillness of Enugu's skyline. Somewhere between pain and peace, she felt something shift, a quiet confirmation from her body that today was the day everything would change. By late morning, the small room in the maternity wing of the teaching hospital was filled with the echo of footsteps, whispered instructions, and the faint hum of distant voices. Ada lay on the delivery bed, legs slightly bent, her hands clutching the railings beside her. Sweat had gathered across her forehead like dew, and her breathing came in shallow bursts, part exhaustion, part determination. The nurses moved like water, swift, calm, firm. One checked her vitals, another encouraged her in gentle ebo. Ada's gown was loose, damp in places, and her eyes darted from face to face, searching for anything to anchor her fear. It wasn't fear of pain. She had long since come to terms with that. It was the fear of silence at the end, of crying without hearing a cry in return. But that silence never came. It was shattered instead by the sharp, sudden wail of new life. Ada's head turned sharply. Her chest rose with a sob. One of the nurses held up the newborn, wrapped in patterned hospital cloth, still slightly red and squirming. And in that moment, Ada exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Her tears flowed without noise. No scream. No words. Just release. She reached for the child, her hands trembling. The nurses smiled. They had seen this story before, but still, something about the quiet intensity of Ada's face made even them pause and soften. John entered the room with hesitant steps, his shoulders stiff, as if the weight of his past words and silence clung to him like soaked clothes. Ada was resting now, the baby swaddled beside her. She didn't look up immediately, and he didn't speak. Instead, he stood there for a long moment, eyes fixed on the child. It was like looking at something both foreign and familiar, a face he didn't know but somehow belonged to. Slowly, as though the motion itself needed permission, he moved to the side of the bed and knelt. His eyes met Ada's, and for the first time in months, they didn't look away. He stretched out a hand and placed it lightly on the baby's chest. The child stirred slightly. A tear slid down John's cheek, and he didn't wipe it. Ada, still watching, said nothing. Her silence was not bitterness. It was something heavier, something settled. When he finally asked if he could hold his son, his voice cracked. She nodded once. He lifted the baby with both hands, his grip awkward at first, but steady. And then something cracked open in him, a raw, vulnerable stillness that overtook the man who once wouldn't speak. He held the boy against his chest and closed his eyes. Ada looked away, not out of rejection, but to give the moment back to him, privately, without the history hanging between them like a wall. It was not forgiveness yet, but it was no longer resentment. Later that week, the house smelled faintly of freshly cooked yam porridge and dettle. Ada was seated on a low cushion, nursing the baby quietly. The door creaked open and Mama John stepped in, her eyes unsure for the first time in a long while. The older woman was dressed in her Ankara wrapper and matching scarf, but today, she didn't carry her usual confidence. She looked at Ada, then down at the floor, as if the tiles might offer better words than she could find. "Eneni Biko," she started, voice trembling. Ada didn't answer. The baby shifted gently in her arms, drawing her attention for a moment. Then Mama John stepped closer, holding out a steaming bowl with trembling hands, yam and palm oil, Ada's favorite. It was a peace offering without grand speeches. She didn't kneel completely, but her posture bent, the stiffness in her spine humbled. Ada reached for the bowl slowly, her fingers grazing the older woman's knuckles. Their eyes met. There was no warm embrace, no dramatic tears, no forced forgiveness, just a pause, deep and understanding, that said, "We both know." The air between them felt different after that. Lighter. Like the wound had not disappeared, but had finally been cleaned. And though Ada still carried the echo of old wounds in her voice, she no longer carried them on her back. Ada's pregnancy was not met with fireworks or loud celebrations. It bloomed quietly like a flower growing through concrete, unexpected and fragile. She didn't announce it on social media, didn't call all her friends, didn't even tell her mother until the second month had passed. There was a fear stitched into her joy, fear that speaking it out loud would somehow undo it. John, too, walked gently around her like someone guarding a miracle made of glass. He drove her to every appointment, read pregnancy blogs in secret, and started watching her food intake like a concerned nutritionist. Their home didn't magically fill with laughter, but the air became softer, more breathable. Ada noticed things she hadn't seen in years, like the way sunlight slanted across their kitchen counter at noon, or how John now paused to kiss her forehead before leaving for work. Small things, but they mattered. Her body changed gradually, her cravings subtle, garden egg one week, cold oranges the next. And though she battled fatigue and occasional nausea, she welcomed the discomfort like a long-lost friend. It reminded her that something was finally happening, something real. But even as her stomach grew, so did the tension she couldn't fully name, an undercurrent of memory and bruised emotions that hadn't completely healed. Some nights, she still lay awake, hand on her belly, wondering if the baby would fix what had already cracked too deeply. The news eventually began to leak like water through old pipes. First from her cousin, who visited unannounced and saw her adjusting a maternity waistband. Then a neighbor, who noticed her waddle up the stairs. And soon after, Enugu carried the story like wind carries dry leaves, swift and unstoppable. Calls came in like rainfall at the beginning of a stormy season. Her mother cried on the phone. John's sisters sent cautious messages with emojis and long paragraphs of sudden concern. Even his mother, the once blazing fire of accusations, called with a shaky voice and said, "Ada, my daughter. I heard. Please, can I come and see you?" Ada listened to the voice note 3 times before deleting it without replying. She didn't know what hurt more, the sudden sweetness or the years of silence before it. She wasn't bitter, but she wasn't healed either. Forgiveness was not a light switch she could flip because life had shifted course. Some nights, she imagined what she would say if they came visiting. Would she sit them down, remind them of how they emptied her of dignity? Or would she just serve them food and pretend nothing happened? She wasn't sure. But one thing she did know, she wasn't that same quiet Ada anymore. The woman who once sat in family meetings and swallowed insults like communion had been replaced. What remained of her was slower to speak, harder to shake, and unwilling to wear guilt that didn't belong to her. And though the belly grew rounder each week, it wasn't just a baby she was carrying. It was a new version of herself, forged in silence and now stretching toward something fuller. John's mother finally showed up unannounced one humid afternoon, wearing a wrapper too bright for her mood and clutching a bowl of pepper soup like an offering at an altar. She didn't knock long, just twice before Ada opened the door, standing sideways now because her belly led the way. They stared at each other for a full 10 seconds, 2 women on opposite ends of a wound. Then the older woman spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't come to argue. I came to thank you, and to beg." The words hung awkwardly in the air like wet laundry. Ada stepped aside and let her in. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just sat, slowly, like their bones were tired of holding up pride. She placed the bowl on the table, fumbling with the cover like it might shield her from the shame wrapped tightly around her. "I was wrong," she added, her voice catching. "I judged you for something I didn't understand. I punished you for my own fears." Ada didn't rush to reply. She watched the woman's hands tremble as she reached for tissue, and for the first time, she saw not a monster, but a mother who had let grief and pressure turn her into something hard. "You said horrible things," Ada said quietly. "I know," the woman nodded. "But I'm here now. If you allow me, I want to be part of this child's life, even if I don't deserve it." They didn't reach a perfect resolution, but they sat there, talking, pausing, talking again, until the sun shifted across the room and the walls stopped feeling like strangers. As her due date approached, Ada found herself returning often to moments that had passed like ghosts through her life. Conversations she wished she had, arguments she should have left, kindness she gave too freely. But there was no bitterness in her reflection now, just a quiet understanding that life doesn't move in straight lines. Some people come into your life to water your growth. Others come to test your roots. And some simply reveal the kind of soil you've planted yourself in. Pregnancy didn't magically fix her relationship with John, but it opened space for newer truths. He was still learning how to hold vulnerability without folding into guilt. She was still learning how to love without losing herself. They didn't hold hands in public or post each other on WhatsApp status, but they started talking again. Real conversations, messy and awkward but honest. She told him she still carried resentment. He told her he understood. They argued once over baby names, and spent the rest of the night laughing about how two people could fight over someone who hadn't even arrived yet. When they finally settled on a name, it was neither traditional nor trendy. It was simple and heavy with meaning. They chose a name that meant gift without shame. No family members were invited to scan appointments or shopping trips. This journey, Ada decided, belonged to them and the child. Everyone else could wait outside the story until the pages were ready. And with each passing day, as her body swelled with life, Ada began to breathe with a new kind of strength, quiet, certain, and entirely her own. The day labor began. It wasn't with the dramatics Ada had once imagined. No cinematic water breaking or sudden screams in the middle of the night. It began with a quiet discomfort, a tight pull low in her stomach that returned every few minutes like an old debt collector. At first, she wasn't sure. She paced the hallway with measured steps, breathing through each wave of pain as though negotiating with her body. John had already left for work, and the silence in the flat gave her space to hear herself think. By mid-morning, the contractions sharpened. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, sweat collecting at her hairline. She didn't call anyone right away. Not her mother. Not John's family. Not even her sister. It felt sacred, this pain. Like something she needed to go through first alone, as if sharing it too early would break its rhythm. By the time John returned, his phone filled with missed calls and messages from the hospital she had managed to get herself to, she was already in the delivery room, eyes closed, breath coming in heaves. The nurses moved around her with the practiced grace of women who had seen life begin over and over again, yet never got used to the miracle. Her hands gripped the rails of the bed like they were the last solid thing left in the world. And when the cry came, sharp, high, defiant, it sliced through the room like music too beautiful to bear. The nurse held up the child, bloodied and perfect, and for a moment, Ada forgot the years. The pain. The shame. The silence. She forgot everything but that sound. John stood in the doorway, not quite inside, not quite outside, like a man unsure if he had earned the right to be there. His eyes were red, not from sleep but from emotion that had nowhere to go. He watched her cradle the baby, her arms trembling from exhaustion, her eyes glistening not with tears but with something heavier, relief, awe, and quiet victory. The nurse asked if he wanted to hold his son, and for a moment he hesitated, as if afraid he might drop the weight of a truth he had denied for too long. But when the child was placed in his arms, something cracked in him. Not loudly, not visibly, but something shifted. He looked at the small face, the tiny fingers curling around air, and whispered something too soft for anyone to hear. Ada didn't ask what he said. She didn't need to. Some things were not meant for words. Afterward, as she lay in the recovery room, she watched John carry the baby with both hands like someone holding light for the first time. The irony wasn't lost on her. This man who once let her carry shame in silence was now carrying a life that bore his name. And yet, she didn't feel bitterness. She felt closure. Not the kind that slams doors, but the kind that finally lets you walk through one without looking back. For the first time, they were no longer two halves of a broken story. There was something else now. Something new. The calls began again, this time with joy wrapped in every ringtone. John's mother came the following week, not with accusations or demands, but with wrappers, yams, baby clothes, and the kind of humility that doesn't need to be explained. She didn't talk much, just sat in the corner of the room holding her grandson like someone holding forgiveness. She apologized once, not with a speech, but with quiet gestures, lingering glances, and soft touches on Ada's shoulder. Ada accepted it, not because she had forgotten, but because her heart no longer had space for rot. She was too full, too healed, too grateful. There were other visitors, friends who hadn't called in years, neighbors who now claimed they always knew she was a strong woman, colleagues who came with perfumed baby baskets and stories of their own struggles. But Ada wasn't in the mood for attention. She didn't want anyone turning her journey into a fable. She had lived it, bled for it, survived it. Her strength wasn't a lesson. It was simply who she had become. She spent most of her days staring at her son, his eyes darting toward her voice, his mouth sucking air even when not feeding, his fingers wrapping tightly around hers. And in those quiet hours, when the room was still and no one was knocking, she would whisper to him stories he would never remember. About the days of waiting, the weight of silence, the beauty of truth, the fire that didn't burn her, only remade her. As the months passed, the rhythm of her life changed completely. She no longer rushed to wake up dreading questions about children. She didn't dodge family events or avoid baby naming ceremonies. She now showed up fully, her baby strapped to her back, her head high, her footsteps firm. The version of her that once wilted under whispers had long vanished. In her place stood a woman who had seen what silence could do to love, what secrets could do to a name, and what truth, when finally spoken, could heal. John and Ada weren't perfect. They still had hard days. Days when she remembered how long she walked alone. Days when he felt the weight of guilt pressing into his back like a sack he couldn't drop. But they were present now, not just in each other's lives, but in their shared truths. They spoke more, about fears, about the child, about who they had become. They laughed again, not out of obligation, but because joy had made room. One evening, as they sat on the balcony with the baby asleep inside, John reached for her hand and held it without speaking. Ada didn't pull away. She leaned into it, not because she had forgotten everything, but because healing had made the remembering softer. The stars blinked above them, the city buzzed below, and somewhere deep in her heart, Ada knew. The storm hadn't made her bitter. It made her bloom. Not despite it, but because of it. And that, in the quiet of the night, was more than enough. No matter how loud the world becomes, never let anyone else narrate your story for you. Sometimes silence is strength, but don't let it become your prison. Speak your truth when it's time, carry love with dignity, and remember that delay is not denial. Your path might not look like everyone else's, but that doesn't make it less valid. Healing takes time. Trust takes effort. And the right people will see your worth without needing to be convinced. Protect your peace, and don't be ashamed of your scars. They're proof that you made it through. May every heart listening to this be wrapped in strength that doesn't break under pressure. May the tears you've cried in silence become seeds for joy you never imagined. May your truth make room for peace, and may your patience be rewarded beyond your expectations. For everyone waiting, for love, for healing, for children, for closure, may your season of delay turn into a testimony of grace. May your name no longer be tied to shame, but to glory. May every closed door open in its time, and may your story end in joy that no one can take from you. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.